Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of history's most overlooked perspectives, the brutal reality of Viking slavery. You're about to experience what it truly felt like to be torn from everything you knew and thrust into a world where your humanity became someone else's property. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for about how the legendary Viking age actually functioned behind the scenes. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Feel free to comment where and when you started watching this video, or maybe give a compliment about what draws you to these historical journeys. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. The morning mist clings to your village like a shroud when you first hear them coming. You're drawing water from the well, the wooden bucket heavy in your calloused hands. When that sound reaches your ears, the rhythmic splash of oars cutting through water, growing louder with each passing moment, your heart knows what your mind refuses to accept. Vikings. The sound is unmistakable once you've heard the stories. That particular cadence of many oars moving in perfect unison, propelling their sleek longships through coastal waters like sea serpents hunting prey. Your grandmother used to tell tales of such raids, her voice dropping to whispers when she described the dragon-headed ships that could appear from nowhere, sliding up rivers and across shallow bays where other vessels couldn't follow. You drop the bucket and run, bare feet slapping against the muddy path toward your family's humble cottage. Behind you, war cries pierce the dawn air like arrows, mixing with the crash of waves and the scrape of ship hulls against pebbled shore. The longships have beached themselves on your peaceful coastline. And now death walks among the morning shadows. You burst through your door, shouting warnings that come too late. Your father is already reaching for his rusted sword when they appear like demons materializing from smoke, tall figures wrapped in furs and iron, their bearded faces painted with battle hunger and marked by old scars. These aren't the romanticized warriors of later legends, they're professionals at violence, men who've made careers of turning other people's peaceful mornings into nightmares. Your father's blade barely clears its sheath before a Viking axe splits his skull with a wet crack that will haunt your dreams for decades to come. Your mother's scream cuts through the chaos, high and desperate, before another raider's spear punches through her chest. Blood bubbles from her lips as she reaches toward you with trembling fingers, trying to speak your name one final time. You lunge toward her, but massive hands seize your shoulders and slam you face first into the dirt floor of your home. The taste of blood and soil fills your mouth as iron shackles close around your wrists. The rope burns your skin as they bind you properly, the coarse hemp fibers cutting deeper with each panic struggle. Around you, your village transforms into a scene from hell's own imagination. Smoke pours from burning thatch roofs while Vikings systematically loot every dwelling, their practiced efficiency suggesting they've done this countless times before. They're not mindless berserkers, they're businessmen conducting a profitable raid, killing the old and infirm who would slow their return journey, while carefully preserving the young and strong who might fetch premium prices in distant slave markets. You're forced into a stumbling line with other survivors. Maria from the baker's shop, her face streaked with tears and ash. Old Henrik the blacksmith, his massive shoulders shaking with rage he dares not express. Several farm women whose names you barely know but whose terrified eyes mirror your own desperation. The Vikings prod you forward with iron spear points, driving your pathetic parade toward their beached longships like livestock being herded to slaughter. Your bare feet bleed from the sharp coastal stones, leaving crimson prints on the grey pebbles. But you keep walking because stopping means a quick death and a Viking blade. The raiders joke among themselves in their harsh Norse tongue, occasionally pointing at you or the other captives and laughing at private observations. One warrior, his beard braided with silver rings, examines you like a farmer appraising cattle, lifting your chin with the tip of his knife to study your face in the growing daylight. The longships wait like hungry beasts on the shoreline, their dragon prows carved with intricate spirals and their hulls stained dark with tar and what might be old blood. These vessels represent the pinnacle of the 9th century maritime technology, shallow-drafted ships capable of crossing oceans, yet light enough to be carried over land between rivers. Each ship can hold 30 to 60 people, though today they'll be cramming in as much human cargo as physically possible. You're shoved into the cramped belly of the nearest ship, your body pressed against other captives in a space barely tall enough to crouch. The wooden hull reeks of tar, sweat, and something else. The lingering fear of previous human cargo who made this same terrible journey. Scratch marks on the wood show where desperate fingers once clawed at the planks, and dark stains suggest not everyone survived these voyages. Historians still argue whether Viking raids were primarily economic ventures driven by population pressure and trade opportunities, or expressions of religious warfare designed to honour their battle-hungry gods. But as the ship lurches beneath you, such academic distinctions feel meaningless. The reality pressing against your ribs is simple. You've become merchandise, valuable only for your potential labour and the silver coins your body might bring in foreign markets. The ship lurches violently as they push off from shore, and you watch your burning village shrink into the distance through a gap in the hull planks. Everything you've ever known, your parents' unmarked graves, the ancient oak where you carved your initials, the sunny meadow where you shared your first kiss with Thomas the carpenter's son, all of it disappears beyond the horizon like a dream fading at dawn. You're no longer who you were. You're a cargo now, property bound for markets where your worth will be calculated in weights of silver. The Viking oarsmen sing as they row, their deep voices carrying across the grey waters in ancient songs about glorious battles and the mead halls of the dead. One of them notices you staring through the gap and grins, revealing teeth deliberately filed to sharp points, a practice meant to intimidate enemies and mark him as a warrior worthy of Odin's attention. He says something in his harsh tongue that makes the others laugh, and you don't need translation to recognize the tone. You're already becoming entertainment for your captors. As the hours pass and seasickness grips your empty stomach, you begin to understand a fundamental truth that will define every remaining moment of your existence. You're no longer a person with hopes, dreams, and fears. You're thrall, the Norse word that will soon replace your birth name and become your entire identity. You're property, valuable only for the work your hands can perform, the children you might bear, or the price your body might bring in the slave markets of distant cities. The sun sets over waters that grow colder with each nautical mile northward, carrying you toward a life of bondage in lands where winter never truly ends and strange gods demand blood sacrifices from foreign slaves. You close your eyes and try to remember your mother's voice, storing that precious memory deep in your heart like a treasured coin you'll spend slowly over the coming years of darkness. Tomorrow, you'll learn what it means to be nothing at all. The slave markets of Hedeby stretch before you like a nightmare made manifest. After weeks cramped in the longship's belly, your legs barely support you as Viking guards drag you onto the wooden pier. The stench hits you first, unwashed bodies, rotting fish, and something sweeter that you'll later recognize as the smell of fear sweat from hundreds of other captives who've stood where you now stand. Hedeby represents the beating heart of Viking commerce, a bustling trading centre where merchants from across the known world converge to buy and sell everything from amber and furs to human beings. The town sprawls along the shores of Fjord, its wooden buildings rising like crooked teeth from the muddy ground. Smoke from countless hearth fires mingles with the morning fog, creating a grey haze that seems to muffle even the loudest sounds into whispers. You stumble forward, your wrists still raw from the ship's ropes, following a line of other captives toward what can only be described as a human marketplace. Wooden platforms rise from the packed earth like stages, each one designed to display human merchandise to the best advantage. Your stomach lurches as you realise what's about to happen. You're going to be stripped naked and examined like livestock before crowds of potential buyers. The slave merchant who purchased your group from the Viking raiders is a thin man with calculating eyes and fingers stained permanent black from handling silver coins. He speaks multiple languages with the fluid ease of someone who spent decades in this business, switching effortlessly between Norse, Frankish, and what sounds like Arabic when addressing different customers. His name is Thorvald, and he owns what amounts to a human warehouse, rows of wooden cages where slaves wait for sale, their hopeless faces pressed against the bars. "Strip," Thorvald commands in accented Latin, the universal language of trade. When you hesitate, frozen by humiliation and terror, one of his assistants slaps you hard enough to split your lip. The taste of blood mingles with salt tears as rough hands tear away your filthy clothes, leaving you naked and shivering in the cool morning air. The examination that follows strips away the last fragments of your human dignity. Potential buyers circle your platform like vultures, their hands probing your muscles to assess your strength, prying open your mouth to check your teeth for signs of disease or age. A Byzantine merchant in silk robes runs his fingers along your spine, counting vertebrae and testing the flexibility of your joints. An Arab trader examines your hands, looking for calluses that might indicate useful skills like weaving or metalwork. Women buyers prove just as clinical in their assessments. A Norse housewife pinches the flesh of your arms and thighs, gauging how much meat you carry and whether you might survive the harsh northern winters. She asks Thorvald questions in rapid Norse, probably inquiring about your health, your origins, and whether you've shown any signs of rebellion during your captivity. The bidding begins with casual indifference, as if you're a sack of grain rather than a human being with thoughts and feelings. Voices call out numbers in different languages, silver weights that represent your monetary value in this twisted economy. A Frankish merchant offers 12 pieces of silver. The Byzantine counters with 15. The Arab trader raises his voice to 18, causing murmurs of interest from the gathered crowd. Historians still argue whether the Viking slave trade represented the largest human trafficking operation in medieval Europe. But standing naked on that auction block, you understand the scope of this horror in your bones. Thousands of people just like you are bought and sold here every year, their lives reduced to simple economic transactions. The Vikings didn't just raid for gold and silver. Human beings represented their most valuable export commodity. You try to catch the eye of other captives waiting their turn, seeking some small comfort in shared misery, but most stare at the ground or into the distance with the hollow expressions of people whose spirits have already been broken. A young girl, perhaps 12 years old, rocks back and forth on her platform while tears stream down her cheeks. An older man with greying hair stands perfectly still, his face a mask of resignation that speaks of previous enslavements and the crushing knowledge that escape is impossible. The Byzantine merchant wins the bidding at 22 pieces of silver, and you feel a strange mixture of relief and terror as Thorvald's assistant records the transaction in a leather-bound ledger. At least your buyer appears civilized, clean-shaven and soft-handed, wearing clothes that suggest wealth rather than the rough furs and battle scars of Viking raiders. Perhaps your life will be easier in the warm southern lands than in some frozen northern farmstead. Your new owner approaches the platform with business-like efficiency, examining his purchase one final time before nodding his satisfaction to Thorvald. He speaks to you in broken Latin, explaining that you'll be travelling south to Constantinople, the great city the Vikings call Miklagard, where opportunities exist for slaves who prove useful and obedient. His voice carries no particular cruelty, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing a recent acquisition. But plans change quickly in the slave markets. Before your Byzantine buyer can complete his paperwork, a commotion erupts near the harbour. A new longship has arrived, flying banners that cause Thorvald's face to light up with greedy anticipation. The ship belongs to Ragnar Grimson, one of the most successful Viking raiders of the age, and his crew is dragging a particularly valuable cargo of Irish monks and Frankish nobles toward the auction platforms. Your Byzantine merchant watches nervously as Viking warriors swarm the marketplace, their presence shifting the entire atmosphere from commercial to predatory. These aren't civilized traders, they're fresh from successful raids, drunk on violence and eager to spend their silver on whatever catches their fancy. One of them, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and scars crisscrossing his face like a map of old battles, stops in front of your platform. He examines you with the eye of someone who knows exactly what he's looking for, not a household servant or skilled craftsman, but pure muscle for the hardest, most back-breaking labour. His Norse words to Thorvald sound like grinding millstones, punctuated by gestures that leave no doubt about his intentions. He's offering to buy you for his farm in the Northern Territories, where winter lasts 8 months and only the strongest slaves survive their first year. The bidding war that erupts between your civilized Byzantine buyer and this Norse farmer feels like watching two people argue over which method they'll use to destroy your life. Silver changes hands with increasing intensity while you stand naked and shivering, unable to influence a decision that will determine whether you'll spend your remaining years in relative comfort or brutal servitude. The farmer wins with an offer of 35 pieces of silver, more money than most people in your destroyed village would have seen in their entire lives. As iron shackles close around your ankles once again, you realize that your value as property has actually increased. You should feel proud, but instead you feel nothing at all. Numbness spreads through your mind like frost, protecting you from the full horror of becoming someone's possession. Tomorrow, you'll begin the long journey north toward a life of unimaginable hardship. But tonight you'll sleep in Thorvald's slave pens, with dozens of other human beings who've learned the same terrible lesson. In this world, your worth is measured entirely in silver coins, and your survival depends on being valuable enough to keep alive, but never valuable enough to set free. The sound of weeping echoes through the wooden cages as darkness falls over Hedeby, mixing with the distant laughter of Vikings celebrating successful trades in the taverns beyond the marketplace walls. The iron collar closes around your neck with a cold finality that seems to seal your fate forever. Your new master, the massive Norse farmer named Bjorn Ironhand, fastens the metal band with practiced efficiency while explaining your situation in heavily accented Latin, mixed with gestures that leave no room for misunderstanding. You are no longer whoever you used to be. From this moment forward, you will answer only to thrall, the Norse word that has now become your entire identity. Bjorn's farm lies 3 days' journey north of Hedeby, through forests so dense that sunlight barely penetrates the canopy, even at midday. You walk behind his horse-drawn cart, your ankles linked by a short chain that forces you to take shuffling steps like an elderly person. The other household slaves, 2 women and an older man who've clearly been in bondage for years, watch you with expressions mixing pity and relief that they're no longer the newest addition to Bjorn's collection of human property. The older male slave, a Frank named Gerard who still remembers fragments of his former life as a monastery scribe, explains the hierarchy that will govern your existence. At the top sits Bjorn and his family, his wife Astrid, their 3 children, and his elderly father who lost an arm in some long-ago battle. Below them come the free servants and craftsmen who work the farm in exchange for shelter and food. At the very bottom, existing in a space barely above livestock, crouch the thralls. "Forget your birth name," Gerard whispers as you stumble along the forest path. "Bjorn will beat you senseless if he hears you use it. You're thrall now, nothing more. The sooner you accept that reality, the better your chances of surviving your first winter." His words carry the weight of bitter experience, and you notice how his back is crisscrossed with old scars from countless whippings. "I once saw a new thrall try to correct a free servant who called him by his old name. Bjorn hung him upside down from the barn rafters for 3 days. The man never spoke his birth name again. Your new name feels like swallowing poison every time someone uses it. Thrall, fetch water. Thrall, muck the stables. Thrall, you worthless piece of meat, move faster." The word strips away every connection to your former identity, your family's lineage, your childhood memories, your dreams of marriage and children. You become a function rather than a person, defined entirely by your ability to perform labour. Even thinking your old name becomes an act of dangerous rebellion, a secret you must guard more carefully than any treasure. The psychological warfare of this renaming cuts deeper than physical chains. Your name had been a gift from your parents, chosen with hope and love, connected to family traditions stretching back generations. Now that sacred word becomes forbidden, replaced by a label that reduces you to your function. You find yourself practicing your old name silently, moving your lips without sound during the long walks, terrified that you might forget it entirely and lose the last connection to who you used to be. Bjorn's longhouse emerges from the forest like something from a fever dream, a massive wooden structure stretching nearly 100 feet in length. Its roof peaked high enough to accommodate the cooking fires that burn continuously in the central hall. Carved dragons and interwoven serpents decorate the exterior walls, their eyes seeming to follow your movements as you approach your new prison. This architectural marvel represents centuries of Viking building tradition, designed to house extended families, servants, livestock, and yes, slaves like you. The craftsmanship speaks of a civilization more sophisticated than the brutal raiders who captured you might suggest. Intricate woodwork displays artistic skills passed down through generations, while the longhouse's design demonstrates engineering knowledge refined over centuries of harsh northern winters. Yet for all its beauty, this building will become your cage, its walls containing every moment of your remaining life. The interior overwhelms your senses with its smoky darkness, punctuated by flickering firelight. The central hearth burns constantly, its flames casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls, while smoke rises toward holes cut in the roof high above. Animal hides cover the packed earth floor, and wooden benches line the walls where Bjorn's family takes their meals and conducts the business of daily life. The smell of burning wood mingles with cooking meat, unwashed bodies, and something else, the lingering scent of fear that seems to permeate any space where human beings are held against their will. Astrid, Bjorn's wife, examines you like a housewife inspecting a new cooking pot. She's a handsome woman in her 30s, her blonde hair braided with silver threads and her arms muscled from years of hard farm work. Her initial assessment carries no malice, just the practical evaluation of someone determining how best to use a new tool. She speaks to you in simple Norse words accompanied by gestures, teaching you the basic vocabulary that will govern your daily existence. "Vatten," she says, pointing to a wooden bucket. "Water." "Elder," indicating the fire. "Mat," gesturing toward the food preparation area where you'll spend countless hours grinding grain and tending cooking pots. Each word replaces part of your original language, gradually erasing another connection to your former life. Within weeks, you'll think in Norse rather than your native tongue, your mind adapting to survive in this alien environment. The sleeping arrangements make clear your position in the household hierarchy. The family occupies raised platforms along the walls, their sleeping areas separated by hanging curtains that provide minimal privacy. Free servants sleep on benches near the central fire, wrapped in wool blankets that offer protection from the cold. You and the other thralls curl up on straw pallets near the entrance, closest to the door where winter drafts will chill you to the bone and farthest from the fire's warming embrace. Your first meal as thrall consists of thin gruel made from barley and scraps of meat, too tough for the family to chew. You eat from a wooden bowl with your fingers, sitting on the floor while your betters occupy benches at the long table. The food tastes like disappointment mixed with survival. Barely enough nutrition to keep you functional, but insufficient to provide real satisfaction or strength. A piece of gristle catches in your throat, and you realize even your body's basic functions must now serve at the pleasure of your owners. Bjorn outlines your duties with the systematic thoroughness of someone who's owned slaves for decades. Dawn to dusk, you'll work without rest or complaint, tending livestock, hauling water, chopping firewood, cleaning stables, grinding grain, repairing tools. Whatever tasks the free members of the household consider beneath their dignity will fall to you. Failure to complete your work means beatings. Attempting to escape means death, probably preceded by creative torture designed to discourage similar thoughts among the other thralls. The rules extend beyond simple labour into every aspect of your existence. You cannot speak unless spoken to. You cannot eat until the free members have finished their meals. You cannot sit in the presence of your betters. You cannot look directly into their eyes without permission. These social restrictions hurt as much as physical punishment, constantly reinforcing your subhuman status in ways that gradually reshape how you view yourself. Historians still argue whether Norse slavery represented a relatively benign form of household bondage or a system of exploitation as brutal as any in human history. But lying on your straw pallet that first night, you understand that such academic distinctions matter little to the people experiencing the reality. The iron collar around your neck weighs less than a pound, but it feels heavier than the world itself. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by the sounds of your new environment. Bjorn's snores rumble from his sleeping platform like distant thunder. The fire pops and crackles, sending sparks spiralling toward the smoke holes in the roof. Somewhere in the darkness, one of the other thralls whimpers softly, perhaps reliving memories of their own capture and enslavement. Outside the longhouse, wolves howl in the forest, their voices echoing the loneliness that now fills your heart. You close your eyes and try to remember your mother's face, but already the details grow fuzzy around the edges. Your old life feels increasingly like a dream you once had, beautiful but unreal, fading more each day as the harsh reality of thralldom becomes your new normal. Gerard warned you that forgetting hurts less than remembering, and you're beginning to understand what he meant. Tomorrow will bring your first full day of labour as Bjorn's property. Your hands will blister, your back will ache, and you'll learn to move quickly when Norse voices bark commands you're still struggling to understand. But tonight, wrapped in a thin blanket that barely covers your shivering body, you hold on to the last fragments of who you used to be. The person you were before the iron collar is dying, and thrall is being born in their place. The transformation has already begun, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The rooster's crow shatters your dreams before dawn has even considered touching the horizon. In your former life, you might have rolled over and stolen a few more precious minutes of sleep. But those days belong to someone else now. The iron collar around your neck serves as a cold reminder that every moment of your existence belongs to Bjorn Ironhand, and his day begins when the darkness still clings to the world like a burial shroud. You roll off your straw pallet, joints aching from sleeping on the hard earth floor, and immediately begin the routine that will define every morning for the rest of your life. The other thralls are already stirring. Gerard the Frank stretches his scarred back with careful movements, while the two women, Ingrid and Helga, quietly fold their thin blankets with the practiced efficiency of people who've learned that delays bring punishment. The longhouse feels like a tomb in these pre-dawn hours. The central fire has burned down to glowing embers during the night, casting barely enough light to navigate between the sleeping platforms where your owners rest in relative warmth and comfort. Your breath forms small clouds in the frigid air as you pad barefoot across the packed earth floor, your feet numb from cold but moving with the automatic precision that slavery teaches quickly. Your first task requires no instruction. You've watched Gerard perform it every morning since your arrival 3 weeks ago. The fire must be fed and coaxed back to roaring life before the family wakes, ensuring their transition from sleep to consciousness occurs in a warm, welcoming environment. You gather kindling from the woodpile near the entrance, your fingers fumbling with the small branches until feeling returns to your hands, blowing gently on the embers. You watch tiny flames dance to life among the dry wood. This simple act carries profound importance in Norse households. The hearth fire represents the heart of family life, the sacred centre around which everything else revolves. As a thrall, you're not truly part of this family circle, but you're responsible for maintaining the flame that sustains it. The irony isn't lost on you, even in your exhausted state. The fire catches and spreads, illuminating the carved wooden posts that support the longhouse roof. Dragon heads and intricate knotwork emerge from the shadows like ancient spirits awakening with the flames. These decorations represent more than mere ornamentation. They're protective symbols meant to ward off evil spirits and ensure the household's prosperity. Yet they offer no protection for slaves like you, caught between the human and animal worlds without belonging fully to either. While the fire grows stronger, you begin preparing the morning meal. The grain must be ground, a tedious process that requires you to work a heavy stone pestle in circular motions until your shoulders burn with exhaustion. The rhythmic scraping sound echoes through the longhouse like a primitive heartbeat, occasionally causing one of the family members to stir in their sleep. You learn to moderate the noise, finding the balance between efficiency and discretion that keeps you invisible while still accomplishing your tasks. Water must be fetched from the well, a journey that takes you outside into the bitter morning air wearing nothing but the thin tunic that serves as your only clothing. The wooden bucket feels impossibly heavy as you haul it back to the longhouse, water sloshing over the rim to splash your bare legs with liquid so cold it burns like fire. Your muscles remember warmer mornings when such tasks were shared among family members, but that life belongs to someone who no longer exists. Historians still argue whether Viking households operated as efficient economic units or patriarchal domains where power flowed entirely through male authority. But standing in Bjorn's kitchen before dawn, you understand that the reality combines both elements. Every person has their assigned role, from Bjorn's position as absolute authority to your place as the lowest form of human property, and the entire system depends on each individual fulfilling their function without question or resistance. The livestock require attention before the family wakes. You slip outside again, this time carrying buckets for milking the cows and goats that provide dairy products for the household. The animals recognize you now, accepting your presence with the same resigned familiarity they might show any other regular feature of their environment. Like you, they exist primarily to serve the needs of their human owners, though they at least retain some dignity in their animal nature. The barn smells of hay, manure, and warm animal bodies, scents that would have seemed unpleasant in your former life but now provide almost comforting familiarity. These creatures don't judge you or demand complex emotional responses. They simply need milking, feeding, and basic care. Tasks you can perform while your mind drifts to memories of home or dreams of impossible freedom. Milking requires a gentle touch and patient rhythm, skills that develop surprisingly quickly when your survival depends on competence. The warm milk streams into wooden buckets with a sound like gentle rain, and steam rises from the liquid in the cold air. This fresh milk will be served to the family with their morning meal, while you and the other thralls will receive whatever remains after everyone else has satisfied their thirst. The pigs require feeding, a task that involves carrying heavy buckets of kitchen scraps and grain to their pen behind the barn. These animals possess an intelligence that sometimes unsettles you. Their small eyes seem to recognize your servile status, and they occasionally show more consideration for your welfare than some of the humans you serve. The irony of receiving kindness from swine while being treated as less than human by your fellow people cuts deeper than any physical wound. By the time you finish the livestock duties, the first hints of grey light begin creeping over the eastern horizon. You hurry back to the longhouse, knowing that Bjorn expects his morning meal to be ready when he rises, and delays result in beatings that leave marks for weeks. The porridge must be stirred constantly to prevent burning, the milk must be strained and set aside for cooling, and the morning bread must be pulled from the coals where it's been baking since before dawn. The family begins stirring as you put the finishing touches on their breakfast. Bjorn emerges from behind his sleeping curtain like a bear leaving hibernation, his massive frame stretching and yawning before his eyes focus on you with the automatic assessment of a man checking his property. Astrid appears moments later, her blonde hair still braided but mussed from sleep, her expression businesslike as she evaluates your morning's work. Their children, 2 boys and a girl ranging in age from 8 to 15, tumble from their sleeping areas with the natural energy of youth. They've learned to treat you as a fixture rather than a person, issuing commands with the casual authority of individuals who've never questioned their right to own other human beings. Thrall, bring more milk. Thrall, the porridge needs salt. Thrall, why is the fire smoking? You respond to each demand with the submissive efficiency that's become second nature, moving quickly but carefully to avoid any action that might be interpreted as rebellious or disrespectful. The morning meal preparation requires constant attention to multiple tasks: serving food, refilling bowls, stoking the fire, cleaning spills, all while remaining as invisible as possible to avoid drawing unwanted attention. The family eats while discussing the day's plans, their conversation flowing around you like water around a stone. They speak of weather patterns, crop schedules, livestock breeding, and community gossip, treating you as a piece of furniture that happens to serve food rather than a human being capable of understanding their words. This social invisibility hurts more than physical punishment, gradually eroding your sense of self-worth until you begin to wonder if perhaps you really are less than human. When the family finishes eating, you and the other thralls receive permission to consume whatever remains. The portions are never generous, but they provide enough nutrition to fuel another day of exhausting labour. You eat quickly and gratefully, knowing that this brief moment of rest will be the last you experience until evening falls again over Bjorn's farm, as the sun finally crests the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have thrilled your former self. You prepare for another day of endless toil in service to masters who will never see you as anything more than a useful tool that occasionally requires feeding. The summer sun beats down mercilessly as you grip the wooden plough handle, your palms already raw and bleeding from just 2 hours of back-breaking work. Bjorn walks beside the oxen, guiding them with sharp commands while you struggle to keep the iron ploughshare cutting straight furrows through soil so rocky and stubborn it seems to fight back with every step. Your shoulders scream in agony. Your back feels like it's being twisted by invisible hands, and sweat pours down your face despite the cool morning air that still carries winter's memory. The field stretches before you like an endless sea of brown earth, dotted with stones that must be removed by hand before the plough can pass. Each rock you lift feels heavier than the last, and your fingers have long since gone numb from gripping the rough handles of your tools. This particular field has been forest until recently, and the stumps of massive trees still dot the landscape like broken teeth, their roots creating underground obstacles that jar your arms and shoulders when the plough strikes them. Faster. Thrall. Bjorn's voice cracks like a whip across the morning air. The ground must be broken before the next rain, or we lose another week's planting season. His impatience carries the weight of someone whose livelihood depends on timing the agricultural cycle perfectly, but you're already moving as fast as your exhausted body allows. The Norse farming season is brutally short, compressed into a few precious months between the last killing frost and the first snows of autumn. Gerard works nearby, swinging a massive iron hoe to break up clods of earth that the plough couldn't penetrate. His movements have the steady rhythm of someone who's performed this same back-breaking labour for years, but you can see the toll it's taken on his aging body. His spine curves from decades of bending over farm tools, and his hands have been twisted into permanent claws by arthritis that comes from gripping wooden handles in all weather. The Viking agricultural system demands intensive manual labour from every available person, but slaves like you bear the heaviest burden. Free farmers work alongside their thralls during critical seasons, but they can rest when exhaustion becomes unbearable. You have no such luxury. Your labour continues until Bjorn decides it's finished, regardless of your physical limits or the pain radiating through your back and legs. The forest clearing process reveals the true scope of Viking land hunger. Trees that took centuries to grow are felled in days, their massive trunks dragged away by teams of oxen while slaves like you attack the remaining stumps with axes and shovels. Your hands blister, then callous, then blister again as you swing your axe thousands of times, each strike sending shockwaves up your arms that rattle your teeth. The work seems endless. For every stump you finally extract, 3 more wait to challenge your diminishing strength. Historians still argue whether Viking expansion was driven by population pressure, forcing agricultural intensification, or by cultural values that celebrated conquest and exploration. But labouring in these half-cleared fields, you witness the practical reality of both forces. Every acre wrested from the forest requires enormous human effort, and slaves provide the muscle that makes such expansion economically viable for Norse farmers. The soil itself tells stories of previous struggles. Beneath the surface layer, you uncover arrowheads from ancient battles, pottery shards from earlier settlements, and bones from animals that once roamed freely through forests now reduced to stumps and furrows. Your shovel occasionally strikes pieces of iron, old weapons or tools left behind by previous inhabitants who faced their own versions of the Viking expansion you're now enabling through your forced labour. Stone removal becomes a daily torture that never truly ends. The northern soil seems to grow new rocks overnight, frost action constantly pushing fresh obstacles to the surface where they can damage ploughshares or break the legs of livestock. You develop techniques for lifting stones safely, bending your knees, using your legs rather than your back, working the larger rocks loose with iron bars before attempting to move them. But even proper technique can't prevent the accumulated damage of moving thousands of stones every day. The rock walls that border Norse fields represent years of slave labour, each stone carried by hand from the fields where it once hindered cultivation. These walls serve multiple purposes, clearing agricultural land, marking property boundaries, and providing some protection for livestock, but they exist primarily because thralls like you have strong backs and no choice in how those backs are used. Your sweat and pain become permanent fixtures in the landscape, anonymous monuments to forced labour that will outlast your forgotten life. Water management requires constant attention in these marginal northern lands. Drainage ditches must be dug through clay soil so dense it seems like digging through stone. while irrigation channels need regular maintenance to prevent flooding during spring snowmelt. You spend entire days standing knee-deep in muddy water, your legs numb from cold while you clear debris from drainage systems that prevent valuable cropland from becoming swampy wasteland. The planting season brings its own unique torments. Seeds must be scattered by hand while you walk behind the plough, your movements timed precisely to ensure even distribution across the freshly turned earth. Your back aches from the constant bending required to reach into the seed bag, and your legs burn from walking mile after mile across uneven ground. The spring mud sucks at your bare feet with each step, and by midday your legs are caked with dirt that dries and cracks as the sun grows stronger. Barley, oats, and rye form the foundation of Norse agriculture, crops chosen more for their ability to survive harsh northern conditions than for their palatability. You scatter these seeds with the knowledge that most of the resulting harvest will feed your masters, while you and the other thralls will receive only the damaged grain and chaff that's deemed unfit for free consumption. The irony of planting food you'll never taste properly cuts deep as you bend and scatter, hour after hour. The oxen that pull the plough require constant attention and encouragement. These massive animals represent significant investments for farmers like Bjorn, and their welfare often takes precedence over slave comfort. You learn to read their moods and energy levels, adjusting the pace of work to keep them productive without causing injury or exhaustion. A lame ox can cripple the entire farming operation, while an exhausted slave can simply be worked until they collapse and then replaced. Bird scaring becomes another endless task as the planted seeds attract flocks of crows, sparrows, and other creatures determined to feast on Bjorn's investment. You spend hours running through the fields, waving your arms and shouting to drive away birds that seem to multiply faster than you can discourage them. The work requires constant vigilance, because a moment's inattention can result in significant crop loss and the brutal beating that inevitably follows. Your body adapts to the demands of farm labour through a painful process of breakdown and rebuilding. Muscles you never knew existed announce their presence through waves of agony that keep you awake despite bone-deep exhaustion. Your hands become landscapes of calluses, blisters, and scars, while your back develops the permanent ache that marks lifetime manual labourers. Sleep provides only temporary relief before the cycle begins again with each dawn. The other thralls work nearby, each absorbed in their own struggle against the demands of Norse agriculture. Ingrid swings a scythe with mechanical precision, cutting weeds from around young grain shoots, while Helga carries endless loads of manure to fertilise the soil. None of you waste energy on conversation. Breath is too precious to spend on words when every inhalation must fuel the next hour of punishing labour. As the sun reaches its zenith and your shadow shrinks to a small pool at your feet, you realise that this is only the beginning of another 16-hour workday. And summer has barely begun. Winter arrives like a predator stalking its prey, each day stealing a few more minutes of precious daylight until you're working in perpetual twilight. The temperature plunges so low that your breath forms crystals in the air, and the iron collar around your neck becomes a band of ice that burns your skin with every movement. Do you remember those summer days when you complained about the heat while ploughing Bjorn's rocky fields? Now you'd trade anything for the memory of warmth as you stumble through your morning tasks with fingers too numb to feel the tools you're gripping. The longhouse takes on a different character in winter, transforming from a smoky shelter into a desperate fortress against the crushing cold that wants to kill everything living outside its walls. The fire burns constantly now, consuming wood at an alarming rate that keeps you and the other thralls busy from dawn until well past dark. Your first task each morning involves venturing into the bitter darkness to split more firewood, swinging an axe with hands so cold you can barely feel whether you're hitting the log or missing entirely. The woodpile behind the longhouse represents your primary battleground against the Nordic winter. Logs that seem manageable during autumn now feel like frozen stones. Their wood so hard from cold that your axe bounces off them, with jarring impacts that travel up your arms to rattle your skull. You learn to build small fires near the woodpile, using precious fuel to thaw the logs enough that they'll split properly. The irony of burning wood to make wood burnable would be funny if frostbite weren't already blackening your fingertips. Your breath creates small clouds that freeze and fall to the ground like snow as you work. And the sweat from splitting wood turns to ice on your skin within minutes. The wool tunic that barely protected you during summer becomes laughably inadequate against winter's assault. Astrid eventually takes pity and gives you a threadbare cloak that previous thralls wore to their deaths. But even this extra layer provides minimal comfort against temperatures that turn human flesh into brittle ice. The water sources present constant challenges that would have seemed impossible during warmer months. The well freezes solid, forcing you to carry buckets of water from a spring nearly half a mile away, through forest paths slick with ice and hidden beneath treacherous snowdrifts. The trek becomes an expedition requiring careful planning. One wrong step could leave you trapped in a snowbank with buckets of water that freeze solid before you can extract yourself. Ice forms everywhere, creating a crystalline prison that makes every simple task exponentially more difficult. The barn door freezes shut each night, requiring you to hack at the ice with whatever tools you can find before you can tend the livestock that depend on your care for their survival. Your bare hands stick to metal tools, leaving skin behind when you finally manage to pull them away. The pain of frostbitten flesh is unlike anything you experienced in your former life. A burning, tingling agony that never completely goes away. The animals suffer alongside you, their warm breath creating clouds of steam in the frigid barn air. The cows need constant attention to prevent their water from freezing, while the pigs huddle together for warmth in piles that make it difficult to determine which animals are sleeping and which might be dying from the cold. You learn to break ice from water troughs with hammers, creating small pools of liquid that freeze again within hours. Feeding the livestock becomes a race against time and temperature. Hay that remained flexible during autumn now crackles like glass when you handle it, and carrying the heavy bales from storage to feeding areas requires navigating paths made treacherous by ice and snow. The animals crowd around you desperately when you arrive with food, their hunger sharpened by the extra calories they need to maintain body heat in the brutal cold. Tool maintenance becomes critical when metal contracts in the cold and wooden handles crack from freeze-thaw cycles. You spend hours by the forge fire, not for warmth but to repair axes, hammers, and other implements that break down faster in winter conditions. Your scarred hands shake as you try to wrap leather around cracked wooden handles, knowing that a broken tool means either dangerous delays or beatings from Bjorn when essential work goes unfinished. Historians still argue whether the Viking Age expansion was partly driven by the need to escape harsh Scandinavian winters through southern raids and settlements, but huddled in a freezing barn at midnight while tending sick animals. You understand the desperate reality behind such theories. The cold doesn't just make life uncomfortable. It threatens to kill everyone and everything that can't generate enough heat to survive until spring returns. The longhouse interior becomes a carefully managed ecosystem where every breath of warm air must be conserved and distributed efficiently. You learn to move quietly through the smoky darkness, completing tasks without disturbing the delicate balance of warmth that keeps the family alive. The central fire requires feeding every few hours throughout the night, a responsibility that falls to whichever thrall draws the short straw for night duty. Your sleeping arrangements near the entrance expose you to the worst drafts and coldest air in the building. The thin straw pallet that seemed uncomfortable during summer becomes a sheet of ice that offers no insulation from the frozen ground beneath. You curl into a tight ball, sharing body heat with the other thralls in a desperate huddle that preserves just enough warmth to prevent death during the longest nights. Food becomes both more precious and less satisfying during winter months. The stored grain that feeds the household through the cold season tastes increasingly stale and sometimes shows signs of mould that no one can afford to waste. Your portions shrink as Bjorn calculates how much food his slaves need to remain functional versus how much he can save for his family's survival. The math rarely works in your favour. The psychological weight of Nordic winter crushes spirits as effectively as the cold destroys flesh. Daylight becomes a brief, grey interlude between long periods of darkness that seem to leech hope from your soul along with warmth from your body. You begin to understand why Norse mythology speaks of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Anyone who's survived a Scandinavian winter can imagine the world ending in ice and darkness. Candle making becomes another essential winter task. Though the flickering lights provide more psychological comfort than practical illumination, you dip wicks into melted animal fat repeatedly, building up layers of tallow that will burn for precious minutes when darkness falls. The work requires steady hands despite the cold, and mistakes result in wasted materials that Bjorn can't afford to replace until spring trading resumes. Your breath fogs constantly indoors, creating a personal cloud that follows you through daily routines. Ice crystals form on the inside walls of the longhouse where warm air meets freezing surfaces, and you scrape these formations away each morning before they can fall and extinguish the fire that keeps everyone alive. The sound of your scraping echoes through this building like fingernails on stone. The forest around Bjorn's farm transforms into an alien landscape where familiar landmarks disappear beneath snowdrifts and ice formations that reshape the terrain into something unrecognizable. Trees crack with sounds like thunderclaps when expanding ice splits their trunks, while the wind creates howling symphonies that seem to carry the voices of previous thralls who didn't survive their first Nordic winter. As you stumble through another pre-dawn routine, your movement's automatic despite the cold that penetrates to your very bones. You realize that survival has become your only ambition. Dreams of freedom, revenge, or reunion with lost family fade before the immediate necessity of generating enough body heat to see another sunrise in this land, where winter wages war against all living things. The kitchen hearth becomes your second home as winter tightens its grip on Bjorn's farm, the flickering flames providing the only warmth that penetrates the bone-deep cold settling into your very soul. You crouch beside the fire pit, stirring a massive iron cauldron filled with ingredients that would have made your stomach turn in your former life. Blood sausage bobbing in dark broth alongside chunks of fermented fish that smell like the bottom of a stagnant pond. This is Norse cuisine in all its pungent glory. And as thrall, you must not only prepare it but pretend gratitude for any scraps that fall your way. Astrid stands over you like a blonde-haired hawk, her sharp eyes monitoring every movement as you learn to navigate the complex world of Viking cooking. Her wooden spoon strikes your knuckles when you stir too vigorously, splattering precious broth onto the hearthstones. And the sting brings tears to your eyes that have nothing to do with the smoke swirling through the longhouse. Gentle, you worthless creature. She hisses in Norse that you're finally beginning to understand. Food is not so plentiful that we can waste it on your clumsiness. The blood sausage represents everything alien about your new existence, made from pig's blood mixed with barley and stuffed into cleaned intestines. It embodies the Norse philosophy of using every part of an animal to survive harsh northern winters. You watch the dark. Lumpy cylinders float in the bubbling pot like bloated leeches, knowing that this protein-rich delicacy will sustain your masters through the coldest months, while you receive only the cooking water that remains after the sausages are removed. Fermented fish, gravlax and lutefisk, challenge your gag reflex with their overwhelming stench of controlled decay. The process begins months earlier when fresh catches are buried in salt and left to decompose in precisely controlled conditions that transform raw fish into something that barely resembles its original form. Your job involves turning these reeking masses regularly, ensuring even fermentation while trying not to breathe too deeply of the ammonia-like fumes that burn your nostrils. Historians still argue whether Viking food preservation techniques were developed from necessity or represented sophisticated culinary traditions. But standing in Astrid's smoky kitchen, you understand that survival trumps taste in societies where winter can last 8 months. Every fermented, pickled, or dried foodstuff represents insurance against starvation, and slaves like you exist partly to manage the labour-intensive preservation processes that keep Norse families alive. The grinding stone becomes your nemesis, a massive basalt wheel that requires your full body weight to operate as you transform dried grain into flour fine enough for baking. Your shoulders burn as you lean into the circular motions, hour after hour. While Astrid criticises the texture of your work, too coarse, and the bread will be inedible. Too fine, and you've wasted precious time that could have been spent on other tasks. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. Push, turn, until your world shrinks to the scraping sound of stone on stone. Bread making in a Norse household involves techniques passed down through generations of women who've learned to coax sustenance from the limited ingredients available in northern climates. The dough feels different from anything you knew in your former life. Dense and heavy with barley flour, flavoured with whatever herbs and seeds might mask the taste of grain that's been stored too long in damp conditions. Your hands knead the resistant mass while Astrid explains the mysteries of fermentation with the patience she might show a particularly slow child. The cooking fire requires constant attention and adjustment, its flames providing the only heat source for preparing meals that feed a household of 12 people plus livestock. You learn to read the fire's moods, when to add wood for higher heat, when to bank the coals for slow cooking, how to position pots and pans to take advantage of different temperature zones within the same flame. A moment's inattention can ruin hours of preparation, earning you a beating that leaves bruises for weeks. Meat preparation reveals the full extent of Norse resourcefulness in utilising every part of slaughtered animals. Nothing goes to waste. Organs become sausages. Bones provide marrow for soups. Even blood finds its way into various dishes that challenge your civilised sensibilities. You learn to clean intestines for sausage casings, scraping away the contents while trying not to think too deeply about what you're handling. The work is disgusting but essential, and complaining means going without food. The preservation of meat for winter storage involves techniques that seem more like witchcraft than cooking. Strips of beef and pork hang from the rafters like gruesome decorations, slowly drying in the smoky air until they become jerky hard enough to crack teeth. Salt-cured hams age in corners where the temperature stays just above freezing, developing white mould that Astrid assures you is perfectly normal. You turn these hanging meats regularly, checking for signs of spoilage that could poison the entire household. Dairy work provides some of the few pleasant moments in your kitchen duties. The warm milk from morning milking must be processed quickly before it sours, transformed into cheese, butter, and fermented drinks that will sustain the family through lean times. You learn to separate cream by skimming the surface of settling milk, your movements gentle enough not to disturb the delicate layers, but quick enough to complete the task before Astrid's impatience erupts into violence. Cheese-making becomes an art form that you master through painful trial and error. The milk must be heated to precise temperatures that you judge by touch, since no thermometers exist to guide your work. Too hot, and the curds won't form properly. Too cool, and the cheese will spoil before it ages. You learn to recognise the exact moment when Rennie transforms liquid milk into solid curds, your hands becoming sensitive instruments that can detect subtleties invisible to your eyes. The root cellar beneath the longhouse stores the vegetables that supplement the Norse diet during winter months. Turnips, carrots, and onions huddle in the darkness like buried treasure, their earthy smell mixing with the mustiness of stored grain and the lingering aroma of preserved fish. Your daily trips to this underground chamber involve navigating narrow wooden steps with armloads of produce, trying not to stumble in the dim light that filters through the cellar's single opening. Cooking accidents happen regularly in the smoky chaos of the Norse kitchen, and as the lowest-ranking person present, you bear responsibility for every mistake. Burned porridge earns you a slap that rattles your teeth, while oversalted soup might result in a day without food as punishment for wasting precious seasonings. You learn to taste everything carefully, adjusting flavors with the skill of someone whose survival depends on pleasing palates more refined than your own. The evening meal preparation becomes a frantic ballet performed in limited space around the central fire. Multiple dishes must be ready simultaneously. Porridge for the children, roasted meat for the adults, fermented fish for Bjorn's elderly father, who claims it helps his digestion. You juggle pots and pans while dodging Astrid's supervision and trying not to trip over the household cats that weave between your legs in hopes of claiming scraps. When the family finally sits down to eat, you stand against the wall like a piece of furniture, ready to refill bowls, stoke the fire, or clean spills without being asked. The sight of food you prepared disappearing into the mouths of your owners creates a hunger that gnaws at your belly. But you've learned not to stare too obviously at meals you'll never taste while they're still warm and fresh. As the dishes are cleared and the family retires for the night, you finally receive permission to eat whatever remains. Cold scraps and cooking water that barely qualifies as food, but represents the difference between survival and starvation in your new world, where even garbage has become a precious gift. The Great Hall erupts in raucous laughter as warriors pound their fists on wooden tables, their voices rising in celebration of successful raids and battles fought in distant lands. You move through the smoky chaos like a ghost, invisible yet essential, carrying heavy pitchers of mead that slosh dangerously close to spilling with each step. The fermented honey wine flows freely tonight. Bjorn is hosting his brother Olaf and a dozen seasoned raiders who've returned from profitable ventures along the Frankish coast, their pouches heavy with silver and their mouths full of boastful tales. The longhouse has been transformed for this feast, its usual austere functionality replaced by an atmosphere of celebration that makes the very walls seem to pulse with excitement. Tapestries hang from the wooden beams, their intricate patterns telling stories of gods and heroes in threads dyed brilliant red and gold. Fresh rushes cover the packed earth floor, releasing the sweet scent of dried herbs with every footstep, while additional torches cast dancing shadows that make the carved dragon heads seem to writhe with life. Your role in this celebration is simultaneously crucial and invisible. You must anticipate every need while remaining unnoticed, serve every guest while never meeting their eyes, and endure their casual cruelty while maintaining the submissive demeanor that keeps you alive. The mead pitcher grows heavier with each circuit of the hall, its contents diminishing as quickly as you can refill it from the barrels Bjorn has brought up from storage for this special occasion. The warriors themselves represent the pinnacle of Viking society, professional fighters whose scarred bodies and confident swagger mark them as men who've faced death and emerged victorious. They wear their wealth openly in the form of silver arm rings, elaborate belt buckles, and weapons decorated with precious metals that gleam in the firelight. Their beards are braided with silver wire, and their voices carry the authority of men accustomed to taking whatever they want through violence. "More mead, Thrall," bellows Eric Bloodaxe, a massive warrior whose nickname apparently comes from his preferred method of settling disputes. His empty drinking horn waves dangerously close to your face, and the smell of alcohol on his breath mingles with the stench of old blood that seems permanently embedded in his clothing. You pour carefully, knowing that spilling even a drop on his fine tunic could result in a beating that leaves you unable to work for days. The stories they tell paint vivid pictures of successful raids across the known world. Olaf describes sacking a monastery in Ireland, his voice dropping to dramatic whispers as he recounts creeping through morning mist to surprise sleeping monks. "They had no weapons," he laughs, "just books and crosses made of gold that melted beautifully in our fires." The other warriors nod approvingly, their eyes gleaming with shared memories of similar conquests. Another raider, a scarred veteran named Gunnar, regales the table with tales of navigating treacherous river systems deep into Slavic territories. The people there fight like cornered rats. He grins, displaying teeth filed to points in the intimidating Norse fashion. But their women fetch excellent prices in Constantinople, and their children learn thrall work quickly. His casual discussion of human trafficking chills your blood, reminding you that you're surrounded by men who view slavery as simply another profitable business venture. The food served at this feast surpasses anything you've seen since arriving at Bjorn's farm. Whole roasted pigs dominate the central tables, their crackling skin glistening with rendered fat, while platters of fresh bread still warm from the ovens release aromatic steam into the smoky air. Wheels of aged cheese, bowls of preserved fruits, and delicacies imported from distant lands create a cornucopia that seems almost magical after months of surviving on scraps and thin gruel. Your stomach growls audibly as you serve course after course of food that represents more wealth than your entire village possessed before the raids. The irony isn't lost on you. These delicacies were likely purchased with silver stolen from people exactly like your murdered family. Their abundance built on the suffering of countless victims who will never taste such luxuries again. Yet hunger makes your mouth water despite your moral revulsion. Historians still argue whether Viking feasts served primarily social functions or represented religious ceremonies honouring Norse gods. But observing tonight's celebration, you see both elements seamlessly woven together. The warriors toast Odin, the All-Father who grants victory in battle, while also strengthening bonds of loyalty and friendship that will support future raiding expeditions. Every shared drink reinforces alliances that might mean the difference between life and death when facing enemies in foreign lands. The entertainment begins as professional skalds, poet-musicians who preserve Norse culture through memorized verses, take their places near the central fire. Their voices rise in ancient songs that tell stories of legendary heroes, mythical beasts, and glorious battles that echo through the halls of Valhalla. The complex poetry weaves together alliteration, metaphor, and historical references that demonstrate the sophisticated artistic traditions underlying Viking warrior culture. One skald recounts the tale of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, his voice modulating from whispers to roars as he describes the hero's battle with the terrible worm Fafnir. The warriors lean forward, caught up in a story they've heard dozens of times, but never tire of experiencing. Their faces glow with firelight and mead-induced euphoria as they lose themselves in visions of heroic deeds and eternal glory awaiting brave men who die sword in hand. The drinking games escalate as the evening progresses, warriors challenging each other to contests that test both alcohol tolerance and physical prowess. You watch nervously as they arm wrestle with enough force to crack the wooden tables, their competitive spirit inflamed by mead and the need to maintain status within their tight-knit brotherhood. These games occasionally turn violent, but tonight everyone seems content to prove their worth through relatively peaceful competition. Women participate in the feast as well, though their roles differ significantly from the warriors who dominate the conversation. Astrid and her female relatives serve as hostesses, managing the complex social dynamics that determine seating arrangements, conversation topics, and the subtle negotiations that occur between raids. Their influence operates through different channels than male authority, but proves equally important in maintaining the social fabric that holds Norse society together. The children observe everything with wide eyes that absorb lessons about their future roles in Viking society. The boys practice warrior postures and memorize fragments of heroic poetry, while the girls learn to manage household complexities and navigate the dangerous waters of adult relationships. Even at their young age, they treat you with a casual disdain reserved for property rather than people. As midnight approaches and the mead takes its toll, some warriors begin showing signs of the violence that lurks beneath their jovial facades. Tempers flare over minor slights, hands drift toward sword hilts, and you learn to position yourself near exits in case the celebration turns deadly. The same men who've shared food and laughter can become mortal enemies within moments, their warrior code demanding blood payment for insults that might seem trivial to outsiders. Your feet ache from hours of constant movement, your arms burn from carrying heavy pitchers, and your back protests from the servile posture you must maintain in the presence of your betters. Yet the feast continues, and your duties multiply as the night wears on. Spilled mead must be cleaned immediately. Empty platters require refilling, and the fire needs constant attention to maintain the warm, welcoming atmosphere that keeps the warriors in good spirits. The stories grow more outrageous as inhibitions dissolve in alcohol. Tales of supernatural encounters mixing with boasts of sexual conquests and business successes. You hear fragments of intelligence about political situations in distant lands, trade opportunities that might prove profitable, and rumours of wealthy targets that could support future raids. This information flows freely because everyone assumes thralls lack the intelligence or initiative to use such knowledge meaningfully. As dawn approaches and the celebration finally begins winding down, you realise you've witnessed something both magnificent and terrifying. The cultural heart of Viking society revealed in all its contradictory complexity, where poetry and violence, honour and brutality, community and exploitation exist in delicate balance that has shaped Northern Europe for generations. The sacred grove awakens with an energy that makes your skin crawl. Ancient trees whispering secrets in the pre-dawn darkness as torch-bearing figures emerge from the forest like demons materializing from the underworld. You stand shivering among the other thralls, your wrists bound with rope that cuts into your flesh, watching as Norse priests prepare for a ritual that will either claim your life or spare it based on the whims of gods you don't understand. The autumn equinox has arrived, and with it comes the great sacrifice to ensure Odin's favour for the coming winter. The ceremonial site chosen for tonight's offering lies deep in the forest, where massive oak trees form a natural cathedral, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy that blocks out the stars. Carved wooden poles rise from the earth like skeletal fingers, each one topped with the skull of some long-dead animal whose empty eye sockets seem to track your movements through the flickering shadows. This place reeks of old blood and older magic. Generations of sacrificial offerings soaked into the very soil beneath your bare feet. The Gotha, the high priest who serves as intermediary between the Norse community and their fierce pantheon of gods, cuts an intimidating figure in his ceremonial robes, adorned with symbols that hurt your eyes to look upon directly. His face bears ritual scars that mark him as someone who's walked between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, while his voice carries the authority of a man who speaks directly with Odin, Thor, and Freyr about matters that determine the fate of entire communities. Behind him stands an altar carved from a single massive stone, its surface stained dark with the blood of countless previous sacrifices. Iron chains hang from rings set into the rock, their metal links worn smooth by the struggles of victims who've died screaming in this very spot. The sight makes your bowels clench with terror, but you force yourself to remain upright because showing weakness might ensure your selection as tonight's offering to the hungry gods above. Do you remember the Christian prayers your mother taught you, whispered in the darkness of your family's cottage before Viking raiders turned your world into nightmare? Those gentle words seem powerless here, overwhelmed by the raw spiritual force emanating from Norse religious traditions that embrace blood, death, and the eternal cycle of violence that defines their warrior culture. Your foreign god feels distant and weak compared to the primal energy crackling through this ancient grove. The community has gathered to witness tonight's ceremony. Farmers and craftsmen, warriors and merchants, all united in their shared need for divine protection during the harsh months ahead. Their faces glow with firelight and religious fervour as they chant prayers in Old Norse, their voices rising and falling in harmonies that seem to make the very trees sway in response. This isn't casual worship, but desperate supplication to gods who demand proof of devotion through suffering and death. 3 other thralls stand beside you in the selection group. A young Irish girl whose tears have left tracks through the grime on her cheeks, an elderly Slavic man whose resigned expression suggests he's accepted his likely fate, and a Frank roughly your own age whose muscles strain against his bonds as he searches desperately for some avenue of escape. One of you will die tonight, chosen by methods that blend religious tradition with practical considerations about which slave can be most easily spared. The priest approaches your group with measured steps, his eyes studying each potential victim with the calculating gaze of someone selecting livestock for slaughter. He examines the Irish girl's youth and health, considers the old man's reduced value as a worker, and evaluates the Frank's strength and rebellious spirit. When his attention turns to you, those ancient eyes seem to peer directly into your soul, weighing not just your physical condition, but something deeper, your spiritual worth as an offering to gods who hunger for human essence. Historians still argue whether Norse human sacrifice represented genuine religious belief or political theatre designed to maintain social control. But standing before that blood-stained altar, you understand that such academic distinctions become meaningless when death approaches. The fear coursing through your veins is real. The spiritual energy pulsing through the grove is tangible, and the priest's power to end your life with a word is absolute. The selection ritual begins with the casting of carved bone dice, their surfaces marked with runes that supposedly channel divine will through random chants. The priest shakes the bones in his cupped hands while chanting invocations to Odin, asking the All-Father to guide the selection toward the sacrifice most pleasing to the gods. The ivory pieces clatter against each other like chattering teeth as they tumble through the air before landing on the altar's stained surface. The crowd presses closer to see which runes have appeared, their faces illuminated by torch flames that cast dancing shadows across features tight with anticipation. Some seem disappointed by the result, while others nod with satisfaction at what they interpret as divine approval. The priest studies the bone dice for long moments, his scarred features revealing nothing of his thoughts as he considers their message from the other world. But the god's will requires confirmation through additional omens. A black ram is brought forward, its throat opened with a silver blade while the priest examines the pattern of blood flowing across the altar's surface. The animal's death throes are interpreted as messages from divine powers, each spasm and final breath carrying meaning that will determine which slave dies tonight. Your heart pounds so loudly you're certain everyone can hear it over the ram's gurgling final breaths. Next comes the examination of the ram's internal organs, a practice borrowed from Roman traditions but adapted to Norse spiritual needs. The priest's hands disappear into the steaming carcass, emerging bloody as he lifts out the heart, liver, and lungs for detailed study. The size, colour, and condition of each organ supposedly reveals divine intentions, while unusual markings or formations might indicate special favour or displeasure from the assembled gods. The Irish girl begins sobbing uncontrollably as the divination process continues, her terror so complete that she falls to her knees despite the ropes binding her arms. The elderly Slav maintains his stoic composure, but sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool night air. The Frank curses steadily in his native tongue, his defiance earning approving murmurs from some Vikings who respect courage even in their enemies. Additional rituals follow. the examination of flame patterns when sacred herbs are burned, the interpretation of cloud movements across the star-filled sky, and the reading of messages supposedly written in the wind's direction through the sacred grove. Each omen adds to the complex web of divine communication that will ultimately determine your fate, while precious time stretches like centuries between each ceremonial observation. Finally, the priest raises his arms toward the sky and announces the god's decision in a voice that carries clearly through the silent grove. The old Slavic man has been chosen, his advanced age and declining health making him the most appropriate offering to ensure divine protection for the younger, more productive members of the community. Relief floods through your body so powerfully that your knees nearly buckle, but the emotion is immediately followed by guilt at feeling grateful for another's death sentence. The selected sacrifice shows no surprise at his fate, walking toward the altar with the dignity of someone who's long expected this moment. His calm acceptance seems to please the assembled crowd, who murmur appreciation for his courage in facing death without complaint. The priest nods approvingly as iron shackles close around the old man's wrists, securing him to the sacrificial stone where he'll await the dawn ceremony that will send his spirit to whatever afterlife awaits foreign slaves in Norse cosmology. As the community begins dispersing back to their homes and the remaining thralls are led away to their quarters, you catch a final glimpse of the chosen sacrifice lying motionless on the blood-stained altar. Tomorrow, his death will supposedly ensure good weather, successful harvests, and protection from enemies for the entire Norse settlement. Tonight, he serves as a reminder that your continued existence depends not on justice or mercy, but on the mysterious calculations of gods who measure human worth in terms you'll never understand. The iron collar around your neck feels heavier than ever as you stumble through the darkness toward another day of servitude. Grateful to be alive, but haunted by the knowledge that next season might bring different omens and a different choice from the hungry deities who rule this harsh northern land. The leather whip cracks across your back like thunder splitting the morning sky, each lash sending waves of fire through your nervous system that make you bite your tongue to keep from screaming. Bjorn stands over you with the methodical patience of someone who's administered countless beatings, his massive arm rising and falling in a rhythm that turns punishment into performance art. The crime that earned you this agony was dropping a wooden bucket while drawing water from the well, a moment of clumsiness caused by fingers too numb from cold to maintain their grip. "Count them, thrall," Bjorn commands in his gravelly Norse, the words punctuated by another stripe across your already bleeding shoulders. 20 lashes for destroying valuable property through your worthlessness. His voice carries no particular anger, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone conducting necessary business. You manage to gasp out the numbers in his language, each word torn from your throat by pain that seems to radiate through every nerve in your body. The wooden bucket lies shattered on the frozen ground beside you, its broken staves scattered like bones after a feast. In your former life, such an accident would have merited an apology and perhaps the cost of replacement, but in your current existence as human property, destroying anything belonging to your master represents a crime worthy of brutal punishment. The bucket's value exceeded your own worth by significant margins in Bjorn's calculating mind. Public punishment serves multiple purposes in Norse society beyond simple retribution. The other thralls stand watching from the barn doorway, their faces carefully blank but their minds undoubtedly recording every detail of your suffering for future reference. Gerard's eyes hold sympathy mixed with relief that he's not the one bleeding in the dirt today, while the women clutch each other's hands and try not to imagine themselves in your position. The iron shackles around your ankles prevent any possibility of escape during your beating, their weight making it impossible to find stable footing on the ice-covered ground. Each blow from Bjorn's whip sends you stumbling forward until the chains jerk you back into position for the next strike. The metal has worn raw patches on your skin that ooze constantly, creating permanent wounds that never fully heal in the harsh northern climate. 15. You gasp through gritted teeth, tasting blood where you've bitten through your lower lip. The count becomes a desperate mantra, each number bringing you closer to the end of this torment, but also marking another layer of humiliation added to your already degraded existence. Your back feels like it's been doused with burning oil. Every nerve-ending screaming protest that your mind struggles to process. Control mechanisms extend beyond physical punishment into psychological warfare designed to break your spirit as thoroughly as chains break your freedom. Sleep deprivation becomes a favourite tool. You're assigned tasks that keep you working until midnight, then roused before dawn to begin another grueling day. Food restrictions follow any sign of defiance, reducing your already meagre rations until hunger becomes another form of constant pain. The stocks await more serious infractions, wooden devices designed to hold your head and hands immobile while exposing you to the contempt and abuse of anyone who passes by. You've seen other thralls locked in these contraptions for days, their necks raw from the wooden boards, and their dignity stripped away more completely than any amount of physical torture could accomplish. The psychological impact of being displayed like a criminal seems to break spirits more effectively than whips or chains. Isolation serves as another weapon in Bjorn's arsenal of control methods. Thralls who show signs of planning escapes or organising resistance find themselves separated from their fellow slaves, confined in small wooden cages barely large enough for a human body. The loneliness becomes torture in itself, human contact being one of the few comforts available to people who've lost everything else. You've watched strong men emerge from isolation as broken shells of their former selves. 18. You wheeze, your voice barely audible above the sound of wind through the bare trees surrounding Bjorn's farm. The cold has numbed some of the pain in your back, but you can feel warm blood trickling down to stain the rough fabric of your tunic. The iron taste of blood from your bitten tongue mingles with the salt of tears you're trying desperately not to shed in front of your audience. Historians still argue whether Viking slavery was characterized by systematic brutality or represented a relatively humane form of household bondage. But the evidence written across your bleeding back tells a different story. Control through violence forms the foundation of the entire system, with physical punishment serving as both deterrent and entertainment for masters who view slave suffering as confirmation of their own superior status. The branding iron waits in Bjorn's tool collection for slaves who attempt escape or show persistent defiance. You've heard screams echoing from the barn when this ultimate punishment is applied, the smell of burning flesh serving as a permanent reminder to all thralls that some boundaries cannot be crossed without permanent consequences. The branded marks identify runaway slaves to anyone who might encounter them, making escape attempts effectively suicidal. Sexual violence lurks as another tool of control, though it's rarely discussed openly among the thralls. Female slaves face constant threats of rape, their bodies considered part of their master's property to be used however desired. Male slaves aren't immune either. Humiliation through sexual degradation serves to reinforce powerlessness in ways that pure physical violence cannot match. The threat often proves more effective than the actual abuse. 20. You finally manage to whisper, your legs giving out as relief floods through your battered body. The beating has ended, but recovery will take weeks if you're lucky enough to avoid infection in the open wounds crisscrossing your back. Bjorn examines his handiwork with the satisfaction of a craftsman completing a difficult project, nodding approvingly at the symmetrical pattern of welts and cuts his whip has carved into your flesh. The cleanup becomes another humiliation as you're forced to gather the broken bucket pieces while blood from your wounds drips onto the frozen ground. Your hands shake from pain and shock, making the simple task nearly impossible, but failure to complete it quickly enough will result in additional punishment. The other thralls watch silently, their expressions mixing sympathy with gratitude that today's violence was directed at you rather than them. Medical care for injured slaves consists of whatever basic treatment might prevent valuable property from dying before recovering enough to return to useful labour. Astrid examined your wounds with the clinical detachment of someone evaluating livestock, applying crude bandages and herbal poultices designed to minimise infection rather than reduce pain. Your suffering matters less than your continued ability to work. Salt gets rubbed into the wounds as a primitive antiseptic, sending fresh waves of agony through your already tortured back. You bite down on leather strap to keep from screaming, your teeth leaving permanent impressions in the material as pain beyond description courses through every nerve. The treatment might save your life, but it feels like another layer of punishment added to an already unbearable situation. The iron collar around your neck serves as a permanent reminder of your status even when no other punishments are being administered. Its weight causes constant neck pain, while the metal edges rub your skin raw with every movement. Sleeping becomes difficult when you can't find positions that don't press the collar's sharp edges into tender flesh. The psychological impact often exceeds the physical discomfort. You're marked as property as clearly as any branded animal. As darkness falls and you're finally allowed to collapse onto your straw pallet, every movement sends fresh lightning bolts of pain through your lacerated back. Tomorrow will bring another day of brutal labour performed with wounds that haven't had time to heal. But tonight you can only lie motionless and pray to whatever gods might listen that you'll survive long enough to see another sunrise in this land, where human worth is measured in silver coins and maintained through systematic cruelty. The first hint of unexpected kindness comes from the most unlikely source, Bjorn's youngest daughter, a girl of perhaps 8 years named Sigrid, who possesses her mother's golden hair but eyes that haven't yet learned to see slaves as less than human. She approaches you while you're mending a broken harness in the barn, her small bare feet making no sound on the hay-covered floor as she carries something hidden behind her back with the secretive excitement that only children can manage. "Thrall," she whispers, glancing toward the barn door to ensure no adults are watching. "You look hungry." From behind her back emerges a chunk of fresh bread, still warm from the morning baking, along with a piece of cheese that represents more food than you've seen in a single portion since your enslavement began. The offering is small by free standards, but to someone surviving on scraps and cooking water, it might as well be a feast prepared by the gods themselves. Your hands tremble as you accept the food, not from cold this time, but from the overwhelming emotion of receiving genuine kindness after months of unrelenting cruelty. Sigrid watches with satisfaction as you tear into the bread, her young face glowing with the pleasure that comes from helping another person without expectation of the reward. "Papa says thralls don't feel hunger like real people," she confides, "but your stomach makes the same sounds as mine when I'm waiting for supper." This moment of compassion feels dangerous in ways that physical punishment never could. Kindness threatens to crack the protective shell of numbness you've built around your emotions, allowing hope to seep back into a heart you've trained to expect nothing but suffering. Yet you cannot bring yourself to reject Sigrid's offering, partly from desperate hunger, but mostly from the desperate human need for connection with someone who sees you as more than animated property. The bread tastes like salvation mixed with fear. Salvation because your empty stomach welcomes every crumb. Fear because accepting gifts from your master's family could result in punishments that make your recent whipping seem like gentle correction. Slaves who form personal relationships with their owners' children often find themselves viewed as threats to proper social order, their humanity becoming problematic in ways that pure objectification never creates. Astrid discovers you eating the contraband food within minutes, her sharp eyes immediately recognizing both the quality of bread you're consuming and the guilty expression on her daughter's face. For a terrifying moment, you expect another beating, perhaps combined with starvation as punishment for accepting unauthorized food. Instead, Astrid's reaction surprises you with its complexity. Anger at her daughter's disobedience mixed with something that might almost be understanding. "Sigrid," she says in Norse, her voice carrying the patient tone of a mother explaining difficult concepts to a child. Thralls are not pets to be fed treats when you feel sorry for them. They receive exactly the food they need to perform their work. Nothing more. Her words should sting, but you detect something beneath the surface. A mother trying to teach her daughter the harsh realities of a world where kindness towards slaves can be seen as weakness or, worse, as challenge to the natural order. Yet Astrid doesn't punish you for accepting the food. And over the following days, you notice small changes in how she manages the household that suggest Sigrid's compassion may have planted seeds in her mother's mind. Your porridge portions grow slightly larger. The cooking water contains more actual food scraps, and you're occasionally given warmer clothing when the worst winter storms threaten to freeze you solid during outdoor work. The kindness remains carefully hidden, disguised as practical management decisions rather than genuine concern for slave welfare. Astrid never speaks to you directly about these improvements, maintaining the social fiction that thralls deserve nothing beyond basic survival while quietly ensuring that survival becomes slightly more bearable. Her actions walk a delicate line between compassion and the rigid hierarchy that governs Norse society. Other unexpected allies emerge as winter deepens into its cruelest phase. Bjorn's elderly father, Olaf, begins leaving small tools and bits of useful material where you can find them during your daily rounds. A piece of leather perfect for patching your worn shoes appears near the woodpile. A sharp stone suitable for cutting rope materializes beside the water bucket. These gifts carry no words or acknowledgements, but they represent recognition of your humanity from someone whose advanced age has perhaps softened the harsh edges of Viking pragmatism. The free servants occupy an ambiguous position in the household hierarchy. Neither slaves nor family members, but something in between that allows for occasional moments of shared humanity. Eric, a young man hired to help with the heaviest farm work, sometimes shares information that helps you avoid Bjorn's worst moods, or warns you when particular tasks need special attention. His assistance comes wrapped in casual conversation, never direct enough to be seen as undermining master authority, but valuable enough to make dangerous days slightly more survivable. Do you remember how Gerard warned you that forgetting hurt less than remembering? These moments of unexpected kindness make his advice harder to follow, cracking open the emotional defences you've built against the constant pain of your situation. Hope becomes a luxury you can barely afford, yet these small gestures of humanity make it impossible to maintain complete despair. Historians still argue whether medieval slavery systems included mechanisms for gradual integration and eventual freedom, or represented permanent caste divisions designed to maintain rigid social hierarchies. But experiencing these complicated relationships firsthand reveals truths that academic theories cannot capture. Human nature resists simple categorization, creating spaces for compassion even within systems designed to eliminate it entirely. The Norse children present the most complex challenge to your emotional survival. Sigrid's younger brother, Magnus, shows occasional flashes of kindness mixed with the casual cruelty he's learning from adult role models. He might share a piece of fruit with you one day, then torment you with sticks and stones the next as he practices the dominance behaviours he observes in his father and older relatives. His inconsistency creates emotional whiplash that leaves you uncertain how to respond to his presence. Even the household animals seem to recognize your intermediate status between human and property. The farm dogs accept your presence without the suspicion they show towards strangers, while the cats seek out your warmth during cold nights when their usual sleeping spots become uninhabitable. These creatures offer companionship without judgment, their simple acceptance providing comfort that human relationships cannot safely provide. The livestock you tend daily develop something resembling affection for your care. showing excitement when you appear with food and water that goes beyond mere anticipation of sustenance. The cows allow you to milk them more easily than they do other workers, while the pigs grunt contentedly when you scratch behind their ears during feeding time. This mutual recognition between fellow creatures trapped in service creates bonds that help maintain your sense of connection to the living world. Religious moments provide another source of complicated comfort. While you cannot openly practice your own faith without risking death as a heretic, quiet prayers whispered during solitary work help maintain connections to beliefs that predate your enslavement. Sometimes you catch Christian slaves crossing themselves when they think no one is watching, or hear fragments of familiar hymns hummed during particularly difficult tasks. The winter solstice brings unexpected developments when Astrid includes you in certain household preparations that require additional hands, but also suggest recognition of your skills and reliability. Being trusted with delicate tasks like preparing special foods or maintaining important equipment represents a form of promotion within the slave hierarchy, accompanied by slightly better treatment and marginally improved living conditions. As spring approaches and your first year of bondage nears its end, these accumulated moments of kindness have created something unexpected, not happiness, but a form of sustainable misery that no longer threatens to destroy your sanity completely. You've learned to treasure small gestures of humanity while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for psychological survival, walking the narrow line between hope and despair that allows continued existence in a world designed to crush your spirit entirely. The iron collar still circles your neck, but somehow it feels slightly less heavy than it did when winter began. The forest path stretches ahead like a promise of impossible freedom, its shadows offering concealment from the searching eyes that will soon discover your absence from the barn where you should be mucking stalls. Your bare feet move silently across fallen leaves still damp with morning dew, each step carrying you farther from Bjorn's farm and closer to what might be either salvation or a death more terrible than anything you've yet endured. The iron collar around your neck feels lighter somehow, as if the mere act of choosing escape has already begun to break the chains that bind your spirit. 3 months of careful planning have led to this moment. You've memorized the guard rotations, identified the weakest points in the farm's defences, and gathered supplies with the patience of someone who understands that haste leads to the whipping post or worse. A piece of stolen bread hides in your tunic alongside a sharp stone that might serve as a weapon if desperation demands it. Most importantly, you carry knowledge of the forest paths that Gerard shared in whispered conversations during those long winter nights when hope seemed as distant as the stars. The old Frank's escape attempt from 15 years ago ended in capture and brutal punishment, but his memories of the route toward the coast remain sharp as broken glass. "Follow the stream north until you reach the standing stones," he whispered during one of your clandestine planning sessions. "From there, head west toward the sea. Frankish traders sometimes shelter in the hidden coves, and a few might risk taking on a runaway slave if you can convince them you're worth the danger." Your heart pounds with such intensity that you're certain it must be audible to anyone within miles. But the forest remains quiet except for the normal sounds of birds and small animals going about their morning routines. No shouts of alarm echo from behind you. No sound of pursuit crashes through the underbrush. Perhaps Bjorn hasn't yet discovered your absence. Or maybe the gods you've started praying to in desperate moments have finally decided to show mercy. The stream Gerard described appears exactly where his memories promised, its water running clear and cold as it winds northward through stands of pine and oak that tower overhead like the pillars of some vast natural cathedral. You follow its banks carefully, stepping on stones and fallen logs to avoid leaving footprints in the mud that would make tracking your route embarrassingly simple for anyone with basic hunting skills. Freedom tastes different than you imagined during all those nights when you lay on your straw pallet dreaming of this moment. instead of sweet release. It carries the bitter flavour of constant fear mixed with the metallic taste of adrenaline that floods your mouth with each imagined sound of pursuit. Every snapping twig might herald the arrival of Bjorn's hunting dogs. Every bird call could signal the presence of searchers closing in on your location. The standing stones rise from a circular clearing like ancient sentinels, their surfaces carved with symbols that predate Norse occupation of these lands. Some unknown people erected these monuments centuries ago, their meaning lost to time, but their presence still emanating a sense of sacred power that makes you hesitate before entering the circle they form. You whisper a prayer to whatever gods might inhabit this place, asking for protection during the next phase of your desperate journey. Historians still argue whether Viking-era slaves had realistic chances of successful escape, or whether the social and geographic barriers made freedom essentially impossible. But standing among those mysterious stones, you understand that desperation makes even impossible odds seem worth attempting. Death while seeking freedom feels preferable to slow extinction through endless servitude, and the forest ahead represents your only chance to reclaim some fragment of the life stolen from you. The western path proves more treacherous than Jihad's ancient memories suggested. Dense undergrowth catches at your stolen clothing while hidden roots conspire to trip your feet and send you sprawling into patches of thorns that tear at your skin like angry claws. Your progress slows to a crawl as you're forced to push through vegetation that seems determined to trap you in its green embrace until Bjorn's men arrive to drag you back to punishment. Hunger begins asserting its presence as the day wears on, and your meagre food supply dwindles faster than planned. The bread that seemed like such treasure when you stole it now tastes like sawdust in your parched mouth, while your empty stomach cramps with need for more substantial nourishment. You remember Gerard's warnings about trying to live off forest plants and roots? Many edible-looking berries and leaves can kill within hours, and starvation might be preferable to death by poisoning. The sound of barking dogs reaches your ears like distant thunder, still far away but growing closer with each passing moment. Your worst fears have materialized. Bjorn has discovered your absence and released his hunting hounds to track you down. These animals have been trained to hunt runaway slaves, their keen noses capable of following scent trails that would be invisible to human pursuers. Your heart nearly stops as the reality of your situation crashes down like a falling tree. Panic threatens to overwhelm rational thought as the barking grows louder and more distinct. You can identify individual voices among the pack now. The deep baying of Bjorn's favourite wolfhound, mixed with the higher yipping of smaller tracking dogs, bred specifically for this purpose. They're moving fast, covering ground with the efficiency of predators who know exactly what they're hunting and how to find it. The stream offers your only hope of breaking the scent trail, but crossing running water means leaving obvious tracks on the opposite bank unless you can find rocky areas where footprints won't show. You plunge into the icy current despite the shock of cold water that immediately numbs your legs, wading upstream for several hundred yards before emerging on stones that might not hold evidence of your passage. Your soaked clothing becomes both blessing and curse. The water has washed away some of your scent, but added weight that makes movement more difficult while increasing your chances of dying from exposure if night falls before you find shelter. The wet fabric clings to your skin like a second set of chains, restricting your movements and creating sounds that seem impossibly loud in the forest silence. The barking stops suddenly, creating a silence more terrifying than the previous noise. Either the dogs have lost your trail at the stream crossing, or they've found something that requires their handler's immediate attention. You crouch behind a fallen log, hardly daring to breathe while straining your ears for any sound that might indicate whether your desperate gamble succeeded or failed. Minutes stretch like hours as you wait for some sign of what's happening behind you. No sounds of pursuit resume, But neither do you hear the disappointed voices of men calling off their dogs after losing the trail. The silence feels pregnant with possibilities, none of them particularly encouraging for someone in your precarious situation. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, reminding you that darkness will bring new dangers even if you've temporarily escaped human pursuit. The forest at night belongs to wolves, bears, and other predators that view lone humans as potential prey rather than fellow creatures deserving respect. Your sharp stone and empty hands offer minimal protection against animals that have spent their entire lives perfecting the art of killing. As shadows begin lengthening and the temperature starts dropping toward another bitter night, you face the terrible choice between continuing your flight through increasingly dangerous terrain or finding shelter that might also serve as a trap if your pursuers resume their search at dawn. Either option carries risks that could end your brief taste of freedom permanently, but the alternative of voluntary surrender seems even worse than whatever fate awaits you in the darkening wilderness ahead. The distant sound of surf against rocky shores reaches your ears like a whispered promise, suggesting that the coast Gerard described lies somewhere ahead through the gathering gloom. Whether you'll live long enough to reach these hidden coves where freedom might await depends on choices you'll make in the next few hours. As darkness falls over your desperate gamble for a life worth living, your back has become a roadmap of pain, each vertebra announcing its presence with grinding agony that radiates through your entire body as you struggle to lift yet another load of grain onto the storage platform. 5 years have passed since that failed escape attempt. 5 years of accumulated damage that has transformed your spine into a twisted monument to endless labour. Your hands, once capable of delicate work in your former life, now resemble gnarled tree roots, the joints swollen with arthritis that makes even simple grasping movements a trial of endurance. The morning mirror of still water in the washing basin reflects a face you barely recognise as your own. Deep lines etch the corners of your eyes, carved there by years of squinting against smoke and strain. Your hair, once thick and lustrous, has begun showing threads of premature grey that mark you as someone who has lived too much suffering in too few years. The iron collar has worn permanent grooves in your neck, dark indentations that will remain even if freedom ever comes to release you from its weight. New slaves arrive regularly at Bjorn's farm, their fresh terror and desperate hope serving as painful reminders of your own transformation from the broken person you've become. A young Saxon girl named Edith reminds you achingly of your former self, her eyes still bright with defiance, her spirit not yet crushed by the relentless machinery of bondage. You watch her struggle with tasks that have become automatic for you, and part of your soul dies a little more as you realise how completely you've adapted to this existence. "Move faster, old thrall," laughs Magnus, Bjorn's son who has grown from a sometimes kind child into a cruel young man who delights in tormenting the household slaves. At 15, he possesses his father's massive build and his grandfather's casual sadism, viewing your declining physical condition as entertainment rather than the inevitable result of years spent destroying your body for his family's profit. The boy who once shared fruit with you now sees only a broken tool that provides amusement through its struggles. Gerard passed away during the previous winter, his aged body finally succumbing to a combination of pneumonia and the accumulated damage of decades in bondage. You helped carry his corpse to the burial pit behind the barn, where slaves are interred without ceremony or marker, their lives deemed unworthy of the funeral rites accorded to free Norse citizens. His death removed your last connection to hope, the final voice that whispered stories of the world beyond Bjorn's farm. The work has become harder as your body weakens, but the expectations remain unchanged. Bjorn shows no sympathy for your deteriorating condition, viewing your reduced capacity as evidence of laziness rather than physical breakdown. The beatings come more frequently now, his frustration with your failing strength expressing itself through increasingly brutal punishment that your healing flesh can barely endure between sessions. Sleep brings little relief from the constant ache that has settled into your bones like a living thing. Your straw pallet feels harder each night, offering no cushioning for joints that creak and protest with every movement. Dreams of your former life visit less frequently now, your memory of that existence fading like watercolours left too long in sunlight. Sometimes you struggle to remember your mother's face, or the sound of your name spoken with love rather than contempt. The newer slaves look to you for guidance, seeing in your survival some wisdom that might help them endure their own fresh horror. You teach them the tricks Gerard once shared with you, how to conserve energy during the hardest tasks, which foods to avoid, when to show submission and when a small act of resistance might pass unnoticed. But your advice tastes like poison in your mouth, each lesson a small betrayal of the person you used to be. Historians still argue whether long-term slavery produced psychological adaptation that helped ensure survival, or created trauma responses that damaged human functioning permanently. But you know the answer lives in your own fractured mind. You've become something neither fully human nor entirely broken, existing in a grey space between life and death that makes each day a struggle against the temptation to simply stop fighting and let oblivion claim you. Edith's presence forces you to confront how much you've changed. Her horrified reactions to conditions you now accept as normal, serving as an uncomfortable mirror for your own transformation. When she weeps at night, you want to comfort her, but find yourself instead offering practical advice about avoiding attention and conserving strength. The capacity for emotional connection seems to have been burned out of you by years of necessary numbness. The iron collar has worn through multiple layers of skin over the years, creating permanent scar tissue that builds up like sedimentary rock formed by accumulated pain. New slaves wince when they see your neck, their fresh horror at such visible evidence of bondage reminding you that normal people find your condition shocking rather than routine. You've forgotten what it feels like to touch your throat without encountering metal. Your teeth have begun loosening from malnutrition and neglect, several gaps marking places where infected molars had to be pulled without ceremony or pain relief. The constant diet of thin gruel and scraps has left you perpetually undernourished, your body cannibalizing its own muscle to fuel the endless labor demanded by your masters. You catch glimpses of your reflection in puddles and barely recognize the gaunt scarecrow staring back. The seasonal cycles that once marked time with hope now pass like waves over someone drowning in slow motion. Spring no longer brings dreams of escape. Summer means only longer workdays. Autumn signals the approach of another brutal winter, and winter itself has become simply another form of suffering to endure. Time has lost meaning beyond the immediate needs of survival and task completion. Younger slaves sometimes ask about your failed escape attempt, hungry for details about the outside world and the possibilities that might await beyond Bjorn's boundaries. You discourage such thinking with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has learned that hope causes more pain than its absence. Better to focus on making each day survivable than to torment yourself with impossible dreams of freedom. The farm itself has expanded during your years of bondage. Bjorn's success built literally on the backs of slaves like you who've cleared forests, drained swamps, and carved agricultural land from wilderness through sheer physical suffering. You've helped build the infrastructure of your own oppression, each fence post and drainage ditch representing drops of sweat and blood extracted from your failing body. New thralls arrive and old ones disappear with regularity that has taught you not to form attachments to your fellow sufferers. Some die from overwork or disease, others are sold to different masters, and a few simply vanish in ways that suggest they either escaped successfully or died trying. You've learned not to ask questions about absent faces, accepting disappearances as part of the natural order. Astrid has aged as well, though her decline reflects the normal passage of time rather than the accelerated destruction that marks slave existence. Her hair shows elegant silver highlights that speak of dignity and experience. while your own grey threads tell stories of premature aging caused by stress and deprivation. The contrast between her graceful maturation and your physical deterioration illustrates the different ways that time affects masters and slaves. As another dawn breaks over Bjorn's prosperous farm, you rise from your straw pallet with movements that have become automatic despite the protests from every joint and muscle in your battered body. Another day of endless labour awaits, another opportunity to prove your continued usefulness to masters who measure your worth entirely in terms of productivity. The young person who once dreamed of escape and freedom has been replaced by this hollow creature who thinks only of survival, one brutal day at a time. The cough that has plagued you for months grows deeper and more persistent, each spasm sending flecks of blood across your lips like crimson flowers blooming in winter snow. Your chest feels heavy, filled with fluid that gurgles when you breathe, while fever makes your skin burn despite the bitter cold seeping through the longhouse walls. You recognize these symptoms from watching other aging slaves succumb to the lung sickness that claims so many who've spent decades breathing smoke and working in all weather without adequate shelter or nutrition. The morning tasks that once seemed automatic now require tremendous effort, your weakened body struggling to perform functions that healthy people take for granted. Rising from your straw pallet becomes an ordeal that leaves you gasping. While carrying water, buckets threatens to collapse your trembling legs beneath their burden. Yet stopping means death, either from Bjorn's impatience with unproductive slaves or from starvation, if you're deemed too weak to merit continued feeding. Edith watches you with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing their own probable future, her young eyes seeing in your deterioration a preview of what awaits her if she survives long enough to experience similar decline. She tries to help when she can, taking on extra tasks when Bjorn isn't watching, but her assistance comes at the cost of her own strength and risks punishment for both of you if discovered. The other slaves maintain careful distance from your obviously failing health, their behaviour driven partly by fear of contagion, but mostly by the self-preservation instinct that warns against association with those marked for death. In a world where survival requires every advantage, proximity to the dying represents dangerous liability that few can afford. You understand their coldness because you've shown similar calculation toward others who preceded you into decline. Sleep becomes increasingly elusive as the lung sickness progresses, your nights interrupted by coughing fits that spray blood across the straw and leave you exhausted when dawn arrives. The fever creates strange dreams where your deceased family members call to you from across vast distances, their voices mixing with the sounds of your laboured breathing to create conversations that might be imagination or might be something more. Your thoughts drift often to the standing stones where your escape attempt failed years ago, wondering if you should have chosen death in the forest rather than capture and return to this slow deterioration. Freedom through death begins seeming preferable to the grinding misery of watching your body betray you piece by piece, while your spirit remains trapped in flesh that can no longer serve even its most basic functions. Do you remember when Gerard warned that forgetting hurt less than remembering? Now you understand he was speaking not just about past trauma, but about the future that awaits all slaves who live long enough to experience the final stages of their usefulness. Your memories of health and strength become torments that make current weakness more unbearable, while dreams of your former life seem like cruel jokes played by a mind that won't accept its present reality. The winter solstice approaches, bringing with it the longest night of the year and the traditional Norse celebrations that mark the turning of seasons toward eventual spring. But for you, this solstice feels more like an ending than a new beginning, the darkness seeming to echo the shadows gathering around your failing life. The fever makes everything seem distant and unreal, as if you're watching events unfold from somewhere far above your deteriorating body. Bjorn's patience with your declining productivity finally reaches its limit during a morning when your coughing fit prevents you from completing the simple task of feeding livestock. His massive hand strikes your face with casual violence, sending you sprawling into the mud while blood from your split lip mingles with the crimson you've been coughing up for weeks. "Worthless," he growls in Norse, his disgust evident as he contemplates the failing investment you represent. The beating that follows lacks the systematic thoroughness of punishments meant to correct behaviour. This is the mindless violence of someone destroying property that no longer serves its intended purpose. Your weakened body cannot absorb the impacts as it once did, each blow causing damage that would have healed quickly in your younger years but now creates injuries that may never fully mend. Astrid watches the punishment with the detached interest of someone evaluating livestock, her calculations visible in the way she examines your condition for signs of whether you might recover enough productivity to justify continued feeding. Her expression suggests the answer is becoming increasingly negative. Your worth as a slave having fallen below the minimum threshold required to sustain life in a household where every resource must be carefully managed. Historians still argue whether medieval slave systems included provisions for caring for aged or disabled bondspeople, or whether economic pressures made such compassion impossible. But lying in the mud while blood seeps from fresh wounds, you understand that academic questions become meaningless when faced with the practical realities of survival in societies built on human exploitation. The possibility of being sold to someone who might find uses for an aging, sick slave seems increasingly unlikely as your condition deteriorates. Your reputation has spread among the local community, marking you as damaged goods unsuitable for households that expect productive labour from their human property. Even the lowest status work seems beyond your current capabilities, leaving few options for masters who view slaves purely as economic investments. The barn becomes your refuge during the worst episodes of illness, its animal warmth providing some comfort while hiding your weakness from owners who might decide that feeding a dying slave represents wasteful allocation of resources. You curl up among the livestock, finding kinship with creatures who also exist primarily to serve human needs, but at least retain some dignity in their natural animal nature. Night sweats soak your thin clothing, the fever cycling between burning heat that makes you throw off your meagre blankets and bone-deep chills that set your teeth chattering despite being pressed against the warm flank of a sleeping cow. These temperature swings exhaust what little strength remains in your failing body, each cycle leaving you weaker and less able to perform even the minimal tasks required to justify your continued existence. The lung sickness progresses with relentless consistency, your breathing becoming more laboured each day while the blood in your cough increases in volume and frequency. You've watched enough slaves die from similar conditions to recognise the progression toward an end that comes sometimes quickly, sometimes with agonising slowness, but always with inevitability that makes hope seem like childish delusion. Your appetite disappears entirely as the illness advances, your body rejecting even the thin gruel that has sustained you through years of bondage. The smell of food makes you nauseous, while the act of swallowing becomes painful and difficult. Astrid notices your failure to finish meals, her accounting mind calculating how much longer she should continue providing nutrition to someone who can no longer process it effectively. The iron collar that has circled your neck for so many years now feels impossibly heavy, its weight seeming to increase as your strength diminishes. The metal has worn grooves so deep in your flesh that removing it would probably require tools and cause massive bleeding. But sometimes you fantasize about the relief of feeling your neck free from its burden, even if freedom comes only through death. As consciousness begins fading in and out like a tide that carries you towards some distant shore, you wonder if this is how all slave stories end, not with dramatic escape or heroic rebellion, but with quiet dissolution into darkness while masters calculate the cost of disposal and replacement. Your last coherent thought focuses on gratitude that the suffering is almost over, and that soon you'll join Gerard and all the others who've found their only true freedom in the silence that waits beyond pain. The final breath rattles from your lungs like autumn leaves scattered by winter wind, carrying with it the last fragments of a consciousness that has endured more suffering than any human should bear. Your body lies motionless on the straw pallet, where so many nights were spent dreaming of freedom that never came. While around you the normal sounds of the longhouse continue unchanged, cooking fires crackling, voices discussing the day's work, children playing games that prepare them to become the next generation of masters and slaves. Astrid discovers your death with the same clinical detachment she might show toward a broken tool, her fingers checking your neck for pulse before nodding with satisfaction that the household's burden has been reduced by one mouth that no longer needs feeding. There's no mourning, no acknowledgement that a human life has ended, just practical considerations about disposal and replacement. Your body has become an inconvenience to be managed efficiently, like any other waste product generated by the farming operation. The other slaves gather briefly around your corpse, their faces showing the complex mixture of grief, relief, and fear that accompanies every death in bondage. They mourn not just your passing, but the reminder of their own likely fate. Seeing in your lifeless form a preview of endings that await them all unless accident, disease, or violence claims them first. Yet they also feel grateful that today's death belongs to someone else, buying them additional time in a world where every sunrise represents a small victory against inevitable dissolution. Bjorn orders your burial without ceremony, your body wrapped in the same threadbare blanket that provided minimal comfort during your final illness. No prayers are spoken over your grave, no marker erected to acknowledge your existence, no record kept of a life that began with hope and ended in anonymous suffering. You join Gerard and countless others in the unmarked cemetery behind the barn, where slaves return to the earth that claimed their sweat and blood during years of forced labour. The shallow grave dug by reluctant hands barely covers your remains, the frozen ground making deeper excavation too difficult for workers who want to complete this unpleasant task quickly. Within weeks, scavenging animals will scatter your bones across the forest floor, erasing even the minimal physical evidence that you once walked among the living. Nature reclaims what society discarded, returning your substance to cycles that care nothing for human hierarchies or suffering. Edith receives your few possessions, the sharp stone you once hoped might aid in escape, the leather scraps you used for patching clothes, the small wooden cup that held countless meagre meals. These pathetic remnants of a human life hold little practical value, but they represent connections to someone who understood her struggle in ways that free people never could. She whispers your name over these objects, one of the few people who will remember that you existed. The iron collar that circled your neck for so many years becomes evidence of the system that destroyed you, its inner surface stained with blood and worn smooth by constant rubbing against flesh that never healed completely. Bjorn examines it for damage before adding it to his collection of restraints, waiting for the next batch of human property. The metal shows no sign of the suffering it caused, ready to begin breaking another spirit with the same efficient cruelty. Your replacement arrives within months, a young Frisian captured during spring raids, his eyes bright with the same desperate hope that once burned in yours before years of bondage extinguished it forever. He receives your old collar, your former sleeping spot, your previous duties, as if individual identity matters less than the functions that slaves perform within the household machinery. The cycle continues with mechanical precision, grinding through human lives like grain through millstones. The stories of your existence fade quickly from household memory, your name forgotten by everyone except the few slaves who shared your suffering and understood its weight. Free family members never learned your original name, never cared about your former life, never recognized your humanity enough to preserve any record of your passage through their world. You become another faceless victim in the vast machine of Viking expansion that consumed thousands of lives to fuel its military and economic success. But in the whispered conversations of new slaves learning to survive, fragments of your experience persist like seeds scattered by wind. Your techniques for avoiding the worst punishments, your warnings about which foods to refuse, your hard-won knowledge of master moods and seasonal dangers. These practical lessons help others endure what you could not. Death transforms your suffering into wisdom that might save lives, giving posthumous meaning to years that seemed meaningless while you lived them. Historians still argue whether Viking slavery represented a minor footnote in medieval history or a massive system of human exploitation that shaped entire societies. But your unmarked grave holds evidence that cannot be disputed by academic theories. Flesh and bone don't lie about the reality of violence, while scattered remains testify to lives that were lived, suffered, and ended without recognition from the civilizations built on their destruction. The longhouse where you died continues operating with ruthless efficiency. New slaves filling roles vacated by death or disability, while masters pursue wealth and status through violence that seems natural to them as breathing. Your absence creates barely a ripple in routines designed to function regardless of which particular humans fuel them. The system endures while individuals disappear, testament to the institutional nature of oppression that outlasts any single victim. Yet something intangible remains, the accumulated weight of testimony from countless voices silenced by violence, but not completely erased from memory. Every scar on every slave body tells part of your story. Every whispered prayer in forgotten languages carries fragments of dreams you shared. The powerful may control written history, but they cannot entirely eliminate the evidence embedded in broken bones and traumatized minds. In the great halls where Viking warriors boast of their conquests, no songs celebrate slaves who died building the wealth that funds their celebrations. No poems immortalize the courage required to endure bondage. No sagas chronicle the quiet heroism of people who maintained humanity despite systematic dehumanization. The official record speaks only of masters and their achievements, as if the labor that made such achievements possible materialized from air rather than flesh and blood. But the standing stones you passed during your failed escape attempt remain in their forest clearing, ancient monuments to forgotten people who also lived, suffered, and died without recognition from the societies that consumed their lives. These weathered markers suggest that your story represents part of a larger human pattern, the eternal struggle between those who wield power and those who suffer under it, played out across centuries with different actors but unchanging essential dynamics. The spring that follows your death brings new growth to the forest where your bones rest. Wildflowers blooming above unmarked graves while fresh leaves unfurl on branches that witnessed your final moments. Life continues with cycles older than human civilization, creating beauty from decay while caring nothing for the suffering that fertilized its emergence. Your body nourishes plants that will shelter other creatures, transformation continuing long after consciousness ended. As seasons turn and years accumulate over your forgotten resting place, the specific details of your torment blur into the larger landscape of human suffering that stretches across centuries and continents. Your individual pain becomes part of something vast and impersonal, a testament to capacity for both cruelty and endurance that defines much of human experience. The story ends not with justice or redemption, but with quiet dissolution into the earth that claims all victims and victimizers alike, leaving only questions about whether anything learned from such suffering justifies the price paid in human lives. The forest grows quiet now, gentle reader, as our journey through one person's unimaginable ordeal draws to its close. The wind through ancient trees carries whispers of stories like this one, countless voices from the margins of history, speaking truths that official records never bothered to preserve. Tonight, as you rest in warmth and safety, perhaps you'll remember that comfort exists partly because others suffered to create it, their sacrifices invisible but no less real for being unacknowledged. Sleep comes easier when we understand how precious ordinary freedoms truly are. The ability to choose your own name, to sleep where you wish, to eat when hungry, to dream without fear, these simple gifts, which many take for granted, represent luxuries beyond the imagination of people trapped in systems designed to crush human dignity beneath the weight of others' ambition and greed. Let the darkness embrace you now with gentleness that was denied to so many who came before, their struggles paving pathways toward whatever justice and compassion exist in our imperfect world. Rest well, knowing that remembering such stories honors the forgotten dead and perhaps makes their suffering count for something in the endless human struggle toward light. Close your eyes, dear listener, and dream of better worlds than the one we've witnessed together tonight, where every human voice matters and no one dies unnamed or unmourned in the shadows of history.